Today is Martin Luther King Day, and I think as the first full day of retreat, there's something significant in it being Martin Luther King. Because I don't know about you, but for me, as a child, he was really one of my heroes. And not just when I was a child, I mean, all through my life, he's been one of my heroes. And I think having heroes is important. And I think especially in our day and age, having people who really show an ethical way of living and a compassionate way of living, and who don't compromise on their values and don't compromise their integrity. I think those people are especially important for us to notice and think about, because most of what we see in the newspaper, in the media, in sports, are people who compromise their values for the sake of money or fame or whatever. And so people like Martin Luther King, who really stand up for what they believe in, I think are very good examples for all of society, and also very good examples for us as Buddhist practitioners, because I think that's the kind of people where we aim to become, are people, who think clearly, compassionately, and stand up for what we believe is right. So the New York Times today, in memory of Martin Luther King, did some little brief sketches, of some of the other African American leaders and how they were spoken of at the time that they died. So I haven't read all of them, but I just looked at a few, and there were a few that really touched me, and so I thought I would read to you about them. I would read Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, except I would cry. So I'm not going to do that. Okay? That speech just reduces me to tears. So here's one photograph. You've probably never heard of this man. His name is Samuel Battle. This is his photo here. He's in the uniform of a New York police officer. Okay? So I'll just read what they wrote, just a brief thing. His obituary was actually quite longer. And in his obituary, you see again and again the racism that this man had to deal with. He was, the first African American, doing so many things in law enforcement, and of course the white officers were, totally against him. So, they eventually got used to him, but because he did some remarkable things. Okay, but here's what the New York Times wrote about him now. So he was a great-grandson of a Revolutionary War soldier who fought aside his master in the Revolutionary War. And he was the son of former slaves. Okay, so Samuel Jesse Battle broke ground in 1911 as the first person appointed to the New York City's combined 10,000-member police force after the city was consolidated in 1898. He became the first black sergeant, first black lieutenant, and first black parole commissioner. Can you imagine what that entailed in New York City at the turn of the 20th century? He started as a houseboy at an upstate New York hotel, then worked as a red cap at Grand Central Terminal. Initially rejected by police surgeons after he was given a medical evaluation that falsely said he had a heart condition because they didn't want to admit him onto the force. He retook the test and passed it, after prominent blacks protested to city officials. Okay. As a policeman, As a policeman, he was given the silent treatment by fellow officers until one day he dashed into a crowd of rioters to rescue a white officer. And then here's a quote from him, "The white officers worked in an all-Negro neighborhood, practically, and they needed me as much as I needed them, and sometimes more," Mr. Battle recalled. In his book, One Righteous Man, Arthur Brown quoted Mr. Battle on an uncompromising career. Here's the quote, which this is what really touched me. "I would rather have honesty and character than prestige and wealth." Okay. I would rather have honesty and character than prestige and wealth. I can walk and ride the streets of this city, hold my head up, look at all men in the face. Okay? So I think that's a very Dharma statement, isn't it? And he had his priorities very, very clear. His honesty, his integrity, how he felt about himself was much more important than social status and wealth. Yeah. Then, of course, I had to do Rosa Parks. Yeah. This is when she's being fingerprinted. Yeah, after they arrested her. She was a small lady, It took 5 days for the news to reach the Times. But finally, on December 6, 1955, an Associated Press dispatch from Montgomery, Alabama, reported that a Mrs. Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old department store seamstress, had been fined $14 in police court for disregarding a driver's order to obey a municipal segregation ordinance and give her seat to a white passenger. She was by no means the first black to challenge the separation of the races in public transportation or accommodation. In 1854, think of this, 1854, a 24-year-old teacher, Elizabeth Jennings, who had been ejected from a whites-only 3rd Avenue trolley in Manhattan. Can you imagine? Yeah, challenged the trolley company's segregation policy and won. But Mrs. Parks' resistance touched off a bus boycott by blacks and elevated her into the pantheon of fighters for civil rights. And I don't think when she did it, she had any idea that this would be the kind of result of what she did. In 2013, 8 years after she died at age 92, she was immortalized as the first black woman to be honored with a life-size statue in the United States Capitol. Her act of defiance, the Times wrote, grew into a mythic event that helped touch off the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. She explained, "I had been pushed around all my life and felt at this moment that I couldn't take it anymore." Yeah? So it goes on. There's other ones. Like I said, I haven't read them all. Maybe I'll read some of the others. I may talk about them in future days. There's one about Jackie Robinson that I haven't read, but I remember, reading somewhere that they made him, because when he played for the Dodgers, and he was one of their big hitters, wasn't it? And they made him stay at different hotels. He couldn't stay at the same hotel as the white players. This is at a time when I was alive, They started him at at first base in 1947. That was before I was alive. But, you know, so much of his career happened. You know, when I think in my lifetime, this kind of nonsense was going on, it's like unbelievable. Anyway, I'll read more and maybe show you some more pictures. But I think those two people are good people to think of as embodying the kind of values that we want to grow into and have as Buddhist practitioners and as ethical human beings. So, you know, sometimes we feel, oh, one life, like me, for example, you know, we're one of 7, when we think I'm one of 7 over 7 billion human beings. What I do doesn't really matter, you know. But when we see examples of these kind of people, we know that one life really matters. And while all the people who, you know, act like Martin Luther King or, you know, any of these people, they aren't all famous and they aren't all known throughout the world. I'm sure in their own small groups they have a lot of influence. And so I was thinking, because it said that Martin Luther King would have been 87 today. And I thought, wow, he could have still been alive. Like all these years, he could have still been alive. And if he had been alive, how different history would have been. Don't you think? Like everything that's happened in the civil rights movement, if he had been alive during all this, if he had been alive during Ferguson, you know, so many things that have happened, how his presence would have influenced what happened in this country and in the world. And yeah, that you know, even, let's say he was 87, like Nelson Mandela, he was quite old when he died, but just his being in this world made something different, didn't it? You know, because we knew Nelson Mandela was there. And it made a presence of what his values were more conscious in our own minds. So I was thinking all this time, if Martin Luther King had been there, even if as an old man turning 87 today, he couldn't do a lot. Just his presence in the world would make a huge difference. And that also made me think of another person who I'm sure if he had not been assassinated, the world would have been different. And that was Rabin, the Israeli prime minister who was assassinated by a Jewish terrorist. He was the one who was negotiating with Yasser Arafat. And, you know, I'm sure if he hadn't been killed, the whole situation in the Middle East would be dramatically different today. Because he was one person who was really dedicated to peace and dedicated to uniting the parties in some kind of vision. So we look at this and, you know, I mean, it's so tragic when you see that the people who are so brilliant, you know, who get assassinated. Even their memory, you know, makes a strong imprint on our lives. But if they had been able to live, you know, what things would be like.